"That watch is a fake." The sentence dropped like a bomb in the middle of the marble hall. No one dared to breathe. She was just an employee. But what she said, it changed everything. What that millionaire never imagined was that the truth from a quiet young woman would make him question not only his pride, but also his heart. Part 1. On the Smith estate, nestled in the golden rolling hills of Nashville, Tennessee, the air on that October morning seemed different. The wind carried the scent of honeysuckle, and the deep blue sky held a promise that no one there could name. It was the day of the return of James Smith, 32, a real estate magnate accustomed to impressing with everything money could buy, from aged bourbons that only experts knew to works of art that few could even touch. James had inherited not only his family's fortune, but also their arrogance. Tall with an athletic build honed in exclusive New York City gyms, fair skin that spoke of European genes, steel blue eyes that could be as cold as they were calculating, and that black hair slicked back, giving him the air of a Hollywood heartthrob, but with the hardness of a ruthless businessman. He wore Italian suits like armor, and his smile, though perfect, rarely reached his eyes. That day, James brought something special from his trip to Europe, a watch that, according to him, was one of a kind. He had acquired it at a private auction in Switzerland, paying a sum that could feed a family for years. But to him, it wasn't money, it was power. It was one more way to prove he could have what others only dreamed of. The staff was gathered in the grand Carrara marble hall, with its imposing columns and large windows overlooking the oak trees that stretched to the horizon. He appeared dressed in an ivory-colored suit that contrasted perfectly with his tanned skin and a smile that oozed pure vanity. With a theatrical gesture, he raised his wrist as if lifting a crown, a heavy golden watch that gleamed under the morning light like a mythical jewel. "This is not just an accessory," he declared in that deep voice he had perfected in board meetings, looking at the small crowd with barely concealed disdain. "It's a statement of power." Her declaration of what it means to be at the top, the cook's feigned admiration, nodding with forced appreciation, the gardeners avoided eye contact, and the stable hands murmured empty compliments. Everyone knew the ritual. James needed to be adored, and they needed their jobs. But among the submissive faces, the bought smiles, and the calculated flattery, there was a different presence. Emily Johnson, 24, born in a humble neighborhood in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was raised among precision tools and delicate mechanisms. She was the granddaughter of one of the most respected watchmakers in the region, a man who, even in his poverty, understood time as one deciphers ancient poems written in precious metals and tiny diamonds. Mr. Roberts had been a legend in his trade, capable of repairing pieces others considered lost forever. Emily had inherited those magical hands and eyes that could see the invisible. She was a young woman of medium height, slender, but with soft curves that her work uniform couldn't completely hide. Her skin was like porcelain, soft to the touch, with cheeks that blushed easily when she was nervous. But the most striking thing about her were her emerald green eyes, enormous and expressive, framed by long, dark lashes that looked like fans of black silk. Her light brown hair fell in natural waves to the middle of her back, always tied in a simple braid while she worked, but which completely transformed her appearance when she let it down. Her hands, small but incredibly skilled, always had short, clean nails, perfect for the precision work she had learned since childhood. Emily was shy by nature, so discreet she seemed almost invisible, with a soft voice that rarely rose above the whisper necessary to communicate. She had come to work at the estate just a month ago, after her grandfather passed away, and she was left with no family and without the small workshop they had lost to medical debt. She needed the job desperately, not just to survive, but to save money, and perhaps one day recover her grandfather's tools that had been pawned. At the estate she worked as part of the cleaning staff, but she also helped maintain the antique clocks that decorated the main rooms. It was a job no one else knew how to do, and one that James had tolerated because it was convenient to have someone who could care for his collection without having to pay an outside specialist. Emily had learned to become invisible in the shadows of the great house. She knew everyone's schedules, where to be and where not to be, when to speak and when to remain silent. She was a born survivor, used to adapting so as not to bother, not to draw attention, not to cause trouble, until now. As James displayed his new acquisition with the pomp of an emperor, showing off his crown jewels, Emily watched in silence from her place next to the other housekeepers. Her green eyes focused on the watch, and something inside her stirred. It was a familiar feeling, the same one she felt when her grandfather taught her to distinguish between an authentic piece and a forgery. The watch was beautiful. She couldn't deny it. The gold shone with that particular intensity that only precious metals possess, and the engraved details showed exquisite craftsmanship. But there was something that didn't add up. A small detail that her trained eye had caught instantly. For a moment she fought with herself. She knew she should stay quiet, that her job depended on not contradicting her powerful employer's ego, but she also knew that her grandfather had taught her that the truth about a watch was sacred, that allowing someone to be deceived by a fake was a disrespect to the very art of watchmaking. The words came out before she could stop them, clear and firm despite her nervousness. That watch is a fake. The words fell in the grand hall like a bomb. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the buzz of bees in the gardens outside. James froze, his triumphant smile slowly fading like wax in the sun, his blue eyes fixed on Emily with a mixture of shock and disbelief. No one, absolutely no one, had ever dared to contradict him in his own home, and certainly not a mere housekeeper. The other workers held their breath, some closing their eyes as if waiting for the earth to swallow them whole. James tried to compose himself with a nervous laugh that died in the air when he saw the unwavering firmness in Emily's eyes. There was no insolence in her gaze, no defiance. There was only a quiet certainty that unsettled him more than any direct confrontation. "Excuse me," he managed to articulate, his voice laden with a dangerous calm that everyone present recognized as the prelude to a storm. Emily felt her knees tremble, but she stood tall. She had crossed a line she couldn't return from, so she decided to explain, "I know that model, sir. My grandfather taught me to identify it. The screw on the clasp is the wrong type for the era, and the dial has a flaw my grandfather taught me to recognize as a child. The authentic ones have a symbol that subtly shimmers with the light when you move your wrist. That one doesn't have it." Emily's technical and precise explanation hit James like a shower of ice water. Each word was like a needle puncturing his inflated ego, but at the same time, something stirred inside him in a way he had never experienced. How was it possible that this young woman, whom he had barely noticed before, knew so much about something he considered himself an expert in? James's face turned as red as a beet. Public humiliation was something his pride could not tolerate. Without another word, his voice as sharp as a knife, he ordered, "You're fired. Get your things and leave my property now." Emily felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. She knew she had signed her professional death warrant, but something strange calmed her. For the first time in a long time, she had stayed true to her grandfather's teachings. She had honored Mr. Roberts' memory by telling the truth. With the dignity only possessed by those with nothing left to lose, Emily gave a small curtsy and quietly withdrew. She didn't beg, didn't apologize, didn't try to take it back. She simply left, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence and a James Smith who, for the first time in his life, felt small before someone he had considered insignificant. That night, as James stared at the watch on his mahogany desk in his private study, he felt a strange pang in his chest. It wasn't exactly shame, though it should have been. It was something more complex, something he couldn't name. How was it possible that someone so young, so humble, knew so much? And how had she managed to maintain such serenity while shattering his moment of glory? For the first time in years, James Smith questioned if he really knew as much as he thought. And for the first time in his life, he remembered the face of someone he had considered invisible. Have you ever had to choose between the truth and convenience? Has someone you thought was insignificant ever taught you something fundamental? Don't forget to leave a like if this story is getting you excited, and tell me in the comments what city you're reading from. Your support means everything to us, and we want to get to know you better. Also, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Part 2. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the estate. 2 weeks in which James Smith had tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing by firing that impertinent employee. But something wouldn't leave him alone. He had discreetly sent the watch to be authenticated by 3 different experts in New York City, and they had all reached the same devastating conclusion. Emily Johnson had been right. The watch was a masterful forgery, so good it had fooled the auction house and himself, but a forgery nonetheless. James had felt like a child caught in a lie. His pride was wounded, but something deeper was stirring inside him. Curiosity. How had that fragile-looking young woman been able to detect what he and international experts had missed? Meanwhile, Emily had returned to Lancaster with a broken heart but a clear conscience. She was living in a small attic room she rented by the week, surviving on her remaining savings and looking for work without much success. References from previous jobs were useless when your last employer had fired you for insubordination. She had tried to get a job in some jewelry stores and repair shops, but they all demanded formal certifications she didn't have. Her education had been informal, from grandfather to granddaughter, and no matter how talented she was, the job market required papers that Mr. Roberts could never afford. It was a Saturday afternoon when Emily was walking through the historic downtown of Lancaster, looking at the shop windows with a mixture of nostalgia and hopelessness. Her last few dollars would barely cover food for a few more days, and she had started to consider the idea of returning to her hometown, even though there was nothing there for her. She stopped in front of an old watch shop, Time and Tradition, which she had known since she was a child. Mr. Peterson, the owner, had been a friend of her grandfather's and had given her occasional work during her teenage years. The shop had that majestic look of old businesses, carved wooden display cases, beveled glass that reflected the light in a special way, and inside a soft symphony of tick-tocks that created the most beautiful music in the world. Emily pressed her nose against the glass, observing the displayed watches with the reverence of someone contemplating sacred art. There were beautiful pieces, pocket watches with hand-engraved gold cases, marine chronometers with stories of voyages across unknown oceans, vintage wristwatches with porcelain dials that looked like tiny universes. "Looking for something in particular, dear?" The voice startled her. Turning, she found an elderly woman, about 60, with white hair gathered in an elegant bun and kind brown eyes. She wore a beige skirt and blouse set that gave her a distinguished but motherly air. "Oh no, ma'am, I was just looking," Emily replied, blushing. "They're beautiful." The woman studied her for a moment with those eyes that had seen many stories and knew how to read between the lines. "You're Mr. Roberts' granddaughter, aren't you?" Emily nodded, surprised to be recognized. "I'm Eleanor Peterson, Mr. Peterson's wife. Your grandfather and my husband worked together many times. He was a master." Her expression saddened. "I heard about his passing. My condolences, dear." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. And what are you doing around here? We haven't seen you in a while." Emily hesitated for a moment, but something in the woman's warmth invited her to open up. "I'm looking for work, ma'am. I've had some difficulties lately." Eleanor nodded with understanding and looked inside the shop, where an older man was working at a table full of tiny tools. "Arthur, come here," she called inside. "Look who's here." Mr. Peterson came out, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was a man in his 70s, stooped from decades of bending over watches, with half-moon glasses and a smile that radiated kindness. When he saw Emily, his eyes lit up. "Little Emily, look how you've grown." He looked at her with paternal affection. "How is Master Roberts?" Emily lowered her gaze, and Mr. Peterson understood immediately. "Oh, child, I'm so sorry. Your grandfather was one of the greats." At that moment, as they chatted at the entrance of the shop, a late-model black BMW pulled up in front of them. Emily didn't pay attention at first, but when the driver's door opened, her blood ran cold. James Smith got out of the car with the natural elegance that money and a private education bestow. He wore dark grey dress pants, an impeccably ironed white shirt, and Italian leather shoes that shone like mirrors. His blue eyes scanned the street until they landed on the small watch shop. It wasn't a coincidence. James had been investigating. After confirming his watch was a fake, he had felt an almost obsessive need to find Emily Johnson. Not to apologize, that would have been admitting he was wrong, but to understand how she had managed to see what he had not. His contacts had told him that Emily was the granddaughter of the famous watchmaker Evaristo Morales, and that she would likely frequent the specialty shops in Lancaster. Time and Tradition was the oldest and most respected in the city. When James saw Emily standing at the entrance, chatting with the owners, he felt something strange in his chest. She looked different out of her employee uniform. She wore a simple navy blue dress that enhanced the green of her eyes, and her hair was down, falling in natural waves over her shoulders. There was no makeup on her face, but her natural beauty was evident. Those cheeks rosy from the fresh air, those naturally red lips, that porcelain skin that seemed to glow with its own light. Emily felt his presence before she saw him. It was as if an electric current had passed through her body. When she finally looked up and her eyes met his, the world seemed to stop for a second. James approached with measured steps, and Emily felt the urge to run. But Mr. and Mrs. Peterson were there, and she didn't want to create a scene. "Miss Johnson," James said in that deep voice she remembered perfectly. "Mr. Smith," Emily replied, trying to maintain her composure. Mr. Peterson looked between them with obvious curiosity. "Do you know each other?" James nodded without taking his eyes off Emily. "Miss Johnson worked for me briefly. She has an exceptional talent for watchmaking." It was the first time James had publicly acknowledged Emily's skill, and she was so surprised she didn't know what to say. "Really?" Mr. Peterson perked up. "Of course. She's Mr. Roberts's granddaughter. That family has gold in their hands. That's precisely why I'm here, James said, though he himself wasn't entirely sure of his real motives. I have a proposal for Miss Johnson. Emily looked at him with suspicion. What kind of proposal? James took a deep breath. What he was about to say went against all his prideful instincts, but something stronger was pushing him. I'm organizing an exhibition of antique watches at my estate. It will be an exclusive event for international collectors and investors. I need someone who truly understands, someone who can guarantee the authenticity of the pieces. The silence stretched between them. Emily could hear her own heart beating. You're offering me a job after firing me for telling the truth. James felt the heat rise in his neck. Emily's direct question had exposed him in front of strangers, but there was also something admirable in her courage. Circumstances have changed, he admitted with difficulty. It turns out you were right about my watch. Mr. Peterson let out a laugh. Of course, she was right. She's a Roberts. Eleanor gave her husband a warning look. She could feel the tension between the two young people and suspected there was more to the story than was being told. Emily studied James's face. She could see it was hard for him to admit he was wrong, but she also noticed something else in his blue eyes. Respect. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, as if he really saw her. Why should I trust you? Emily asked with that brutal honesty that so unnerved him. James didn't have an easy answer to that question. Why should she trust him? He had humiliated and fired her for doing the right thing. Because we need to work together for this event to be a success, he said finally. And because I recognize talent when I see it. It was the closest thing to an apology anyone had ever heard come from James Smith's mouth. Emily looked at Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, who nodded encouragingly. She knew she desperately needed the job, but she also knew that working with James would be like walking through an emotional minefield. What would be the conditions? She asked pragmatically. James felt a wave of relief as he realized she was considering the offer. You would have to stay at the estate during the event's preparation. It's 6 weeks of intensive work. I'll pay you triple what you were earning before, plus bonuses for each piece you correctly authenticate. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. And after the event, James hadn't thought about the after, and that realization unsettled him. After, we'll see how things go. Emily nodded slowly. It was risky, but it was also an opportunity. Not just for the money, but because working on an exhibition of that magnitude could open professional doors she had never dreamed of. All right, she said finally, but on one condition. James raised an eyebrow, not used to having conditions set for him. Which is, that you treat me with respect. I am a professional, not a housekeeper you can yell at when you feel frustrated. The request was so simple and so fair that James felt ashamed it was necessary to specify it. Of course, he agreed. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson exchanged looks of approval. Eleanor approached Emily and whispered in her ear, Your grandfather would be proud, child. Have you ever had to work with someone who has hurt you before? Do you think second chances are worth it? Part 3. The Smith estate had transformed into a hive of activity. For the 3 weeks following their agreement, a constant procession of armored trucks arrived, loaded with security cases containing some of the most valuable watches in the world. Collectors from Europe, Asia, and America had sent their most prized pieces to be part of the most exclusive exhibition in the Western Hemisphere. Emily had settled into a room in the east wing of the estate, a space that had once been the lady of the house's sewing room. It was large and bright, with windows overlooking the fields of oak trees and a large workbench where she could examine the pieces comfortably. James had ordered the most modern precision equipment to be installed, specialized loupes, high-sensitivity scales, and a digital microscope that could magnify the tiniest details. Emily's transformation was remarkable. Gone was the housekeeper's uniform. She now wore professional attire, crisp white blouses, black dress pants, and a white lab coat when she worked. James had provided her with a complete wardrobe, arguing that she needed to look professional for the international clients, but the truth was, he couldn't take his eyes off her. During those 3 weeks, they had developed a routine. Every morning, James would arrive at Emily's temporary workshop with fresh coffee and donuts from the town bakery. At first, it had been an excuse to supervise her work, but it had gradually become the part of the day he looked forward to the most. Good morning, Emily. He would always greet her with a smile that seemed more genuine each day. Good morning, Mr. Smith, she would reply, still maintaining formality. James, he corrected her each time. We're colleagues now. And every day Emily would smile a little more upon hearing him say it. On those mornings, while Emily examined the newly arrived pieces, James would sit in a nearby chair watching her work. It was mesmerizing to see the absolute concentration on her face, the way her green eyes focused on the tiniest details, how her delicate hands handled precision instruments with the skill of a surgeon. "This Patek Philippe is authentic," Emily would say, looking up from the microscope, "but it has a non-original repair. Someone replaced the crown in the 60s. It doesn't affect the value much, but potential buyers should know." James dutifully noted every observation. At first he had tried to verify her opinions with other experts, but after the first week, he had stopped. Emily was never wrong. "How can you be so sure?" he asked one morning as she examined a vintage Rolex. Emily looked up, surprised by the personal question. James had never before shown curiosity about her thought process. "My grandfather used to say that every watchmaker leaves their fingerprint on every piece they touch," she explained, her eyes gaining that special glint that appeared when she spoke of her craft. "The authentic ones have a coherence in every component. When something doesn't belong, it's like a discordant note in a symphony." James leaned forward, genuinely fascinated. "Can you teach me to see it?" The question surprised Emily so much that she almost dropped the piece she was holding. James Smith, the man who thought he was an expert in everything, was asking her to teach him something. "Do you really want to learn, James?" he corrected her gently. "And yes, I want to learn." That was the moment everything changed between them. Emily made room for him at the workbench and began to teach him the secrets Mr. Roberts had passed down to her. She showed him how to feel the exact weight of an authentic piece, how to recognize the particular sound a Swiss mechanism makes versus an Asian one, how to identify the micro-engravings that only appear on originals. James was a voracious student. His natural intelligence and ability to concentrate made him an exceptional apprentice. But more than that, he was discovering a whole new world through Emily's eyes, and each revelation brought him closer to her. "Your hands are perfect for this," Emily told him one afternoon, taking James's hands in hers to show him how to properly hold a delicate tool. The contact electrified them both. James's hands were large and strong, with long, elegant fingers, but surprisingly sensitive to the touch. Emily felt a strange warmth travel up her arm, and James experienced a tenderness he had never felt before. "How did you know you wanted to do this?" James asked her one afternoon as they worked together, cataloguing a collection of 18th century French pocket watches. Emily smiled nostalgically. "I didn't have a choice. When I was 5, my grandfather found me taking apart my grandmother's alarm clock. Instead of scolding me, he taught me how to put it back together correctly. He said I had watchmaker's hands, and that it was a gift that couldn't be wasted." "And your parents?" Emily's expression saddened. "They died in an accident when I was 8. My grandfather raised me after that." James felt a pang of empathy that surprised him with its intensity. He had grown up with emotionally absent parents, but at least they had been alive. He couldn't imagine the loss Emily had experienced. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That must have been very difficult." Emily shrugged with the resignation only those who have learned to survive early losses possess. "My grandfather was enough. He gave me love, taught me a trade, showed me that beauty can exist in the smallest things." She looked up at James. "And you, James? What was your childhood like?" It was the first time anyone had asked him that with genuine interest, not out of morbid curiosity about his wealth. "Lonely," he admitted after a moment. "My parents were always traveling, closing deals. I grew up with nannies and private tutors in a house too big for one child. Is that why you collect beautiful things? To fill the void?" The question was so direct and so accurate that James felt emotionally naked. No one had ever seen through him with such clarity. "Maybe," he murmured. "I'd never thought of it that way." In those moments of intimate conversation, as the afternoon sun filtered through the windows creating golden patterns on the workbench, something deeper than physical attraction or professional respect began to weave between them. It was a mutual understanding, a recognition of souls that had carried different but equally profound solitudes. James began to notice things about Emily that had previously gone unnoticed. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, how she softly hummed old songs while she worked, the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something interesting in a piece, the musical laugh that escaped her lips when he made an unexpectedly funny comment. Emily, for her part, began to see beyond James's arrogant facade. She discovered he was incredibly intelligent, not just in business, but on a wide range of topics, that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh unexpectedly, that he could be surprisingly gentle when he let his guard down. One night, working late to finish cataloguing a new shipment of pieces, James fell asleep in the chair next to the workbench. Emily watched him sleep, noticing how the hard lines of his face softened in slumber. He looked younger, more vulnerable. Without thinking, she took a blanket from the nearby sofa and gently covered him. James woke up hours later, disoriented for a moment, until he saw the blanket on him and Emily asleep on the sofa, still wearing her white lab coat and with her magnifying glasses hanging around her neck. She looked beautiful and exhausted, and James felt a tenderness so intense it made his chest ache. Careful not to wake her, he carried her in his arms to her room. It was the first time he had entered the space he had adapted for her, and he was surprised at how homely it looked. There were photos of her grandfather on the nightstand, books on watchmaking stacked next to the bed, and a small wristwatch, obviously old and of no monetary value but polished with love, on the personal workbench she had improvised by the window. He gently placed her on the bed and covered her with the comforter. Emily murmured something in her sleep and instinctively snuggled in. James stood for a moment watching her, fighting the urge to stroke her cheek. Instead, he retreated silently, but not before leaving a note on her workbench. "Thank you for teaching me to see time differently. Rest, J." The next day, when Emily found the note, she felt something warm spread through her chest. For the first time since being fired, she felt valued not just as a professional but as a person. That morning, when James arrived with the usual coffee, Emily was waiting for him with a more open smile than usual. "Good morning, James," she said, using his first name for the first time. The smile that lit up his face was like the dawn after a very long night. "Good morning, Emily. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted honestly. That day they worked closer than ever, their hands accidentally brushing as they examined pieces, their heads leaning toward each other as they discussed technical details. The tension between them was palpable, but neither dared to yet acknowledge what was growing between them. However, fate had other plans. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived who would test everything they had built. "Do you believe in second impressions? Have you had an experience where someone you initially disliked became someone special to you? Is this love story thrilling you? Leave us a like and share in the comments what city you're following from. Subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming chapters, because James and Emily's story is just beginning." Part 4. The afternoon had started like any other. James and Emily worked in perfect sync, their conversations flowing naturally between technical topics and personal reflections. They had developed such a harmonious dynamic that they seemed to have worked together for years, not just a month. James was leaning over a particularly intricate piece, a 19th century marine chronometer, when Emily noticed something that made her smile. "You have an eyelash on your cheek," she said softly. Without thinking, she reached out to remove it. The moment her fingers touched his face, they both froze. James instinctively closed his eyes at the contact, feeling the gentle caress of Emily's touch send waves of warmth through his body. "Got it," she murmured, but didn't immediately pull her hand away. James opened his eyes and met Emily's gaze, so close he could see the golden flecks in her green irises. The air between them crackled with electricity. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to lean in towards her. The moment was abruptly shattered by the sound of high heels clicking against the marble floor of the hallway. They sprang apart as if they'd been shocked, just as a spectacular woman appeared in the workshop's doorway. Victoria Miller was 30, and without a doubt one of the most beautiful women Emily had ever seen. Tall, slender, with a figure any model would envy, perfectly tanned skin, and platinum blonde hair that fell in studied waves over her bare shoulders. She wore a red dress that seemed painted onto her body, designer shoes that cost more than Emily's annual salary, and jewels that sparkled like tiny suns. But the most striking thing about Victoria wasn't her physical beauty, but the absolute confidence with which she moved, as if she owned any space she entered. Her eyes, an icy blue, scanned the workshop until they landed on James, with a smile that promised trouble. "Hello, darling," she said in a husky voice that spoke of expensive cigarettes and champagne nights. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The word important was uttered with barely disguised disdain as her gaze slid contemptuously over Emily. James stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Victoria, what are you doing here? Can't I visit my fiancé?" she replied, approaching with feline movements. Emily felt as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown over her. "Fiancé?" Her eyes automatically went to James's left hand, where a gold ring indeed shone, a ring she had never noticed before. How could she have missed it? James noticed Emily's glance and suddenly felt guilty, though he didn't understand exactly why. Technically, he hadn't done anything wrong. The engagement to Victoria had been arranged by their families years ago, when they were both young, and the alliance between the Smith and Miller corporations seemed advantageous for everyone. "Emily, this is Victoria Miller," James said with a formality he hadn't used in weeks. "Victoria, this is Emily Johnson, the horology expert who is helping with the exhibition. Victoria extended a perfectly manicured hand with the condescension of a queen greeting a peasant. "How interesting," she said, looking at Emily's white lab coat and unmanicured hands. "So you fix clocks? How quaint." Emily felt humiliation burn her cheeks, but she managed to maintain her composure. "I'm a specialist in the authentication and conservation of historical pieces," she corrected with dignity. "Oh, my apologies," Victoria laughed, without a hint of sincerity. James has always had a soft spot for charity projects. The casual cruelty of the comment fell over the workshop like a tombstone. James felt a fury he had never experienced, but before he could respond, Emily spoke with a calm that hid her pain. "If you'll excuse me, I think it's time for me to leave. I'll leave the catalogue pieces on the desk, James. I'll see you tomorrow to continue." She took off her white coat with precise movements and hung it in its usual place. As she passed Victoria to leave, Victoria stopped her with a venomous smile. "Oh, but don't leave on my account, dear. I just came to pick up James for a family dinner. His parents are back from Europe and they want to discuss the wedding details." Emily felt as if a dagger had been plunged into her chest. Without responding, she simply nodded and headed for the door. "Emily, wait!" James called after her, but she didn't stop. When Emily's footsteps faded down the corridor, Victoria approached James with that triumphant smile he remembered all too well. "Seriously, James? An employee?" she mocked. "I thought you had better taste." The word employee, uttered with such contempt, made something inside James snap. Emily is not just any employee, she's an exceptional professional. "Please," Victoria rolled her eyes. "I saw how you were looking at her. It's obvious you have a little crush on Cinderella. What's next? Are you going to call off our wedding for some romantic fantasy?" James fell silent, and that silence gave Victoria all the information she needed. "Oh my God," she laughed humorlessly. "You're serious? James Smith, heir to an empire, in love with a— what is she exactly? A clock mechanic? That's enough, Victoria." "No, it's not enough." Her voice hardened. "We have signed contracts, James. Our families have invested years planning this union. You can't just throw it all away for a whim." James knew she was right about the contracts. The engagement between them had been more of a corporate merger than a romantic proposal. Stocks, properties, international businesses, everything was interwoven between the two families. Breaking the engagement would be financially devastating for both sides. "I never said I was going to cancel anything," he muttered, feeling the weight of family obligations crushing something fragile and beautiful that had begun to grow in his chest. "Good," Victoria softened her tone, moving closer to stroke James's cheek in the same spot Emily had touched minutes before. "Because you know we're perfect for each other, darling. We come from the same world. We understand the same rules. That girl, as sweet as she may be, could never survive in our circle." As Victoria spoke, James couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about her delicate yet firm hands handling priceless pieces, about her brilliant intelligence that had surprised him day after day, about the way she made him feel more real, more authentic than he had ever felt in his life. But Victoria was also right about something. Emily was too pure, too genuine for the ruthless world he moved in. The social events, the family intrigues, the constant expectations. How could he ask her to submit to all that? That night at the family dinner, James sat like an automaton while his parents discussed dates, budgets, and guest lists. Robert Smith, his father, was a 60-year-old man who had turned hardness into an art form, tall like James but more heavy-set, with grey hair slicked back and eyes that had never known doubt. "Next week's event will be perfect for the official announcement," he said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "All the media will be there for the watch exhibition, 2 birds with 1 stone. Isabella Smith, his mother, was the personification of cold elegance, 50 years old, looking 40 thanks to the best plastic surgeons in the country, always dressed as if she were about to be photographed for a society magazine. Victoria will look stunning in the photos," she added. "The press will go crazy with the story. The Smith heir and the Miller princess. It's like a fairy tale." James wanted to scream that fairy tales aren't signed with legal contracts, but he remained silent. He had been raised for this since birth, to sacrifice personal desires for the good of the family and the company. Meanwhile, Emily was in her room, looking out the window at the oak field stretching under the moonlight. She had spent the entire night trying to process what she had seen and heard. James's engagement shouldn't have surprised her. Men like him didn't marry for love. They married for convenience, for alliances, to perpetuate dynasties. But it hurt. It hurt more than she had expected, more than she had any right for it to hurt. Sometime over the past few weeks, without realizing it, she had allowed herself to dream. She had imagined that the intimate moments they shared meant something, that James's long gazes and genuine smiles were signs of something real growing between them. She had been a fool, a temporary employee falling in love with her millionaire boss. It was a cliché as old as time itself. The next day, Emily arrived at the workshop earlier than usual, hoping to work in peace before James arrived with his morning coffee. But he was already there, sitting in his usual chair with 2 steaming cups on the table. "Good morning," he said softly as she entered. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," Emily replied, reverting to the formality they had abandoned. James felt the change like a physical slap. "Emily, about yesterday." "There's nothing to explain," she interrupted, putting on her white coat and avoiding his gaze. "Your private life is none of my business. I'm here to do a job, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." The rest of the morning passed in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by strictly necessary professional exchanges. James tried several times to start personal conversations, but Emily cut them off gently but firmly, keeping everything on a strictly business level. The situation became even more tense when Victoria appeared again at lunchtime, this time accompanied by 2 friends just as elegant and superficial as she was. They settled in the garden, visible from the workshop, laughing loudly and making comments clearly designed to be overheard. "I can't believe James is wasting his time with this exhibition," one of Victoria's friends said loudly enough for Emily to hear. "What's so exciting about a bunch of old watches?" "It's a phase," Victoria replied confidently. "He'll get over it. Men sometimes need these little diversions before they settle down for good." James, who had gone out to the garden to ask them to keep their voices down, found himself dragged into a conversation about wedding preparations he didn't remember authorizing. From the workshop window, Emily watched the scene with a heavy heart. James looked comfortable with those people, relaxed in a way he had never been with her. He belonged to that world of luxury and superficiality, and she had been naive to think there could be something more between them. That afternoon, as she organized the final details for the exhibition that would take place in 3 days, Emily made a decision. She would finish the job professionally, stay for the exhibition as promised, but immediately after she would leave. Not just the estate, but Lancaster, maybe even the country. She had a distant cousin in Argentina who worked in a watch shop in Buenos Aires. He had mentioned several times that he could get her a job if she ever wanted a change of scenery. Yes, that's what she would do. As soon as the exhibition was over, she would disappear from James Smith's life as quietly as she had entered it. What Emily didn't know was that James had also made a decision. He had been up all night, fighting with himself, and had come to a conclusion that terrified him as much as it liberated him. He was going to break off the engagement with Victoria. The financial consequences would be devastating. His father would threaten to disinherit him. His mother wouldn't speak to him for months. The media would have a field day with the scandal. But for the first time in his life, James Smith was willing to choose his happiness over family expectations. There was only one problem. He needed to find the perfect moment to tell Emily, and she had erected an emotional wall that seemed impenetrable. The night before the exhibition, the Smith estate was buzzing with activity. Event company employees worked late into the night, installing specialized lighting, additional security systems, and elegant display cases that would house the most valuable pieces. Emily had spent the last 3 days in a state of absolute focus, checking every detail, every label, every security measure. James watched her from a distance, noticing the dark circles framing her beautiful green eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided any direct eye contact with him. They had worked in perfect professional sync, but the human warmth that had grown between them had evaporated like dew in the morning sun. At 11 o'clock at night, when the last employee had left, James found Emily doing a final check in the main hall. She was standing in front of the central display case, where the most valuable piece of the entire exhibition rested, a 16th century astronomical clock worth more than all the houses in a small town. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" James said softly, approaching from behind. Emily didn't startle. She had felt his presence the moment he entered the hall. "Extraordinary," she replied without turning. "My grandfather had a photograph of this clock in his workshop. He said it was the perfect piece, that it represented the union of art, science, and spirituality." "Emily," James moved closer until he could smell the subtle floral scent of her perfume. "We need to talk." She finally turned, and James felt a pang at the sight of the resigned sadness in her eyes. "About what, Mr. Smith?" "James," he corrected automatically, "and you know perfectly well about what." Emily sighed deeply, as if she had been expecting this conversation and at the same time dreading its arrival. There's nothing to talk about. The exhibition opens tomorrow, the auction is the day after, and in 3 days, I'm leaving. You're leaving? Where to? That's none of your concern, Emily replied, but James could detect the pain she was trying to hide. Everything that has to do with you concerns me, he said with an intensity that surprised her. Emily looked at him directly for the first time in days, and what she saw in James's blue eyes confused her. There was pain there, and something that looked dangerously like desperation. Don't say things you don't mean, she whispered. How can you know what I feel if you won't give me a chance to explain? Because you're engaged, Emily exploded, surprising herself with the intensity of her emotion. Because you have a life built that doesn't include temporary employees who fix watches. Because we're from different worlds and I was a fool for thinking that. What did you think? James interrupted, moving closer. Tell me. Emily felt tears threatening to escape and fought to control them. I thought maybe that the moments we shared meant something to you too. But your fiancé was right. I'm a charity project, a temporary distraction. The reference to Victoria made James feel a fury that surprised him with its intensity. Victoria knows nothing about us. Us? Emily laughed humorlessly. There is no us, James. There's an engaged man who got a little bored and an employee who mistook professional kindness for something more. James couldn't hold back any longer. In 2 steps he was in front of her, taking her face in his hands with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his feelings. Does this feel like professional kindness to you? He asked in a hoarse voice, before leaning down and capturing her lips in a kiss that held weeks of repressed desire. Emily stood motionless for a second, shock and longing warring within her. Then, as if a dam had broken, she responded to the kiss with a passion she didn't know she possessed. Her hands tangled in James's black hair, pulling him closer, as if she could merge with him. The kiss was everything they had imagined and more. James tasted the sweetness of her lips, felt the softness of her skin under his hands, breathed in the scent that had been driving him crazy for weeks. Emily lost herself in the sensation of finally being in the arms of the man who had occupied her every thought, feeling her body respond to him in ways she had never known. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. James rested his forehead against hers, keeping her face in his hands. Do you still think you're just a charity project? He murmured. Emily closed her eyes, feeling her resolve crumble like a house of cards. James, this can't happen. You have commitments, responsibilities. I'm going to break the engagement with Victoria, he declared, with a determination that stunned her. Emily's eyes flew open, searching James's face for any sign that he was lying or exaggerating. She found only absolute sincerity. You can't do that. Your family, your company. For the first time in my life, I'm going to do something because I want to, not because it's expected of me, he interrupted. I love you, Emily. I didn't know it was possible to feel something like this, but I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone. The words fell between them like rain on dry earth. Emily felt her heart race, but along with the happiness came fear. I love you too, she admitted in a whisper. But James, the consequences, we'll face the consequences together, he said, sealing the promise with another kiss, this one softer but just as intense. They held each other in the silence of the grand hall, surrounded by centuries of history materialized in clocks that had marked the time of countless lives, silent witnesses to their confession of love. But fate, like the most complex mechanisms, sometimes has hidden gears that change the course of everything in an instant. The sound of heels on marble separated them abruptly. Victoria appeared in the doorway of the hall, and from the expression on her face, it was clear she had witnessed at least part of the scene. How touching, she said with a smile that could have cut glass. Romeo and Juliet, the American version. James protectively stepped in front of Emily, but Victoria hadn't come alone. Behind her appeared Robert and Isabella Smith, along with Edward Miller, Victoria's father, a stern-looking man with enough power to destroy companies with a single phone call. Dad, Mom. James stood tall, preparing for the battle he knew was coming. I can explain. There's nothing to explain. Robert Smith's voice cut through the air like a whip. It's obvious what's happening here. Isabella looked at Emily as if she were something unpleasant she had accidentally stepped on. Is this the reason you've been acting so strange lately? A housekeeper? Emily is not a housekeeper. James felt the fury rise in his chest. She is a respected professional and the woman I'm in love with. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Edward Miller was the first to speak, his voice laden with barely contained threat. James, you have signed contracts with our family, public commitments. Are you really going to destroy decades of work for a romantic whim? It's not a whim, James replied firmly. It's the most important decision of my life. Robert approached his son, and Emily could feel the tension emanating from him like heat from a furnace. If you break this engagement, the consequences won't just be for you. The Millers have the power to destroy everything we've built. We'll lose international contracts, projects that employ thousands of people. Are you willing to be responsible for that? The question hit James like a hammer. He hadn't thought about the employees, about the families who depended on their family businesses. Emily, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Mr. Smith is right," she said, in a voice firmer than she felt. "I can't be the reason so many people lose their jobs." "Emily, no," James turned to her. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Victoria smiled triumphantly. "Unless—" her smile turned cruel. "Unless your Cinderella agrees to disappear discreetly. For everyone's sake, of course." Edward Miller took an envelope from his jacket pocket. "We've prepared a generous offer," he said, addressing Emily directly. "Enough money for you to settle comfortably anywhere in the world. Far from here, of course." Emily looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "Are you offering me money to disappear?" "It's a practical solution for everyone." Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice as cold as ice. "James fulfills his obligations, you gain financial independence, and no one gets hurt." "Everyone gets hurt with this." James stepped between his family and Emily. "You're not going to buy her, and I won't let you treat her as if she were—" "What?" Robert interrupted. "As if she were what she is, a temporary employee who fell in love with her millionaire boss. It's the oldest story in the world, James, and it always ends the same way." His father's words fell on Emily like lashes. Every syllable confirmed the deepest fears she had tried to ignore. It was exactly what she was, a temporary employee who had mistaken her boss's kindness for something deeper. "I accept," she said suddenly, surprising everyone, including herself. "Emily, no." James turned to her, horror evident on his face. "Don't do this." But Emily had already made her decision. With a dignity that impressed even her detractors, she approached Edward Miller and took the envelope. "On one condition," she said, her voice clear despite the tears she fought to hold back. "I want James to be happy. I don't want this to be used as emotional blackmail against him in the future." Edward nodded, clearly pleased that the situation was resolved so easily. "So, of course, we only want what's best for our children." Emily turned to James, memorizing every line of his face, as if it were the last time she would see him, because it probably would be. "Thank you for teaching me that I can be valued for what I know, not just for what I can do with my hands," she told him softly. "These have been the most beautiful days of my life." Without waiting for a reply, without allowing herself one last kiss or hug, Emily walked out of the hall with measured steps, maintaining her composure until she was out of everyone's sight. Only then did she allow herself to run. She ran to her room, to the only privacy she had left, to cry for the love she had found and lost in the space of a few minutes. James tried to follow her, but his father's firm hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Let her go, son. It's for the best." For the first time in his life, James Smith felt that the weight of being who he was might crush him completely. Part 6. The exhibition was a resounding success, at least in professional terms. The specialized media praised the exceptional curation and impeccable authenticity of each piece. International collectors bid astronomical sums for watches that, according to all the experts present, had been evaluated and presented in a masterful manner. James received the congratulations like an automaton. He smiled for the photographs, gave interviews praising the vision of the event, and accepted compliments on his exceptional eye for curation. No one knew that each praise was like a knife twisting in his chest, because the true architect of the success had disappeared before dawn. Emily had left without saying goodbye, taking only a small suitcase with her personal belongings and the unopened envelope. She had left a brief note on her temporary desk. "The catalogue is complete. All pieces have been verified one last time. It was an honor to work on this project." There was no personal reference, no word about what they had shared. It was as if she had decided to erase any trace of intimacy between them, reducing their relationship to strictly professional terms. During the 3 days the event lasted, James operated on autopilot. Victoria was radiant, hanging on his arm at every photo op, chattering about wedding plans to anyone who would listen. His parents seemed satisfied that the crisis had been resolved so discreetly, but the nights were pure torture. James would stay awake late, wandering the halls of the estate like a ghost, hoping to see the light on in the workshop, hoping to see the familiar silhouette bent over the workbench. The room Emily had occupied had been meticulously cleaned, as if she had never existed there. A week after the exhibition, James received an unexpected call. Mr. Peterson, the watchmaker from Lancaster, sounded worried on the phone. Mr. Smith, forgive me for bothering you, but I'm looking for Emily. My wife and I are worried about her. James felt his heart race. She's not with you? No, sir. She came to say goodbye a week ago. Said she was going traveling, but she seemed... Mr. Peterson paused. She seemed very sad. Eleanor says she looked like a woman with a broken heart. Did something happen at the exhibition? James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of guilt like a slab on his chest. It was my fault, Mr. Peterson. It was all my fault. That same afternoon, James drove to Lancaster. He found the Time and Tradition watch shop closed for Sunday afternoon, but Mr. and Mrs. Peterson lived in the second-floor apartment. They received him with tea and homemade cookies, but their faces showed genuine concern. Do you know where she went? James asked bluntly. Eleanor studied him with those wise eyes that had seen many love stories. Do you love her, young man? The direct question caught him off guard, but he no longer had the energy to pretend. More than my own life. Then why did you let her go? James told them the whole story. The family contracts, the financial pressure, the emotional blackmail about the jobs that would be lost. Mr. Peterson listened without interrupting, but as James spoke, the old man's expression hardened. Do you know what my wife told her when she left? Mr. Peterson asked when James finished. She told her, true love isn't negotiated like a business transaction. If he truly loves you, he'll find a way to be with you, without sacrificing others in the process. The words fell on James like a revelation. Emily hadn't run away because she didn't love him. She had run away because she loved him so much she was willing to sacrifice her own happiness to protect people she didn't even know. Do you know where she went? Eleanor exchanged a look with her husband before answering. She mentioned Argentina. She has a cousin in Buenos Aires who works in watchmaking. But James, she used his first name for the first time. If you're going to look for her, make sure you've solved your other problems first. That girl has suffered enough. James nodded, understanding the message perfectly. He couldn't show up before Emily with the same chains that had separated them the first time. He returned to the estate with a determination he had never felt before. If he was going to fight for Emily, he had to be smart about it. He had to find a way to break the contracts without destroying the family businesses, without causing the economic disaster his father had threatened. For the next 2 weeks, James immersed himself in legal documents, old contracts and calls with international lawyers. What he found surprised him. The contracts between the Smith and Miller families had exit clauses that no one had mentioned. Clauses that allowed for the dissolution of the agreement if one of the parties could prove fundamental incompatibility. But more importantly, James discovered that Edward Miller's threats had been exaggerated. Yes, there would be economic consequences, but not the total collapse they had painted. The companies were strong enough to survive the breakup of the alliance. Armed with this information, James called a family meeting. The tension in the main study of the estate was palpable as they all gathered. His parents, Victoria and her father, and several lawyers from both families. I've been reviewing the contracts, James began, placing a stack of documents on the table, and I've discovered we have options that haven't been discussed. Edward Miller's expression hardened. James, I hope you're not thinking of... I'm breaking the engagement, James interrupted, but I'm going to do it in a way that minimizes the impact on both families. Robert stood up so abruptly he knocked over his chair. This is ridiculous. We're not going to let you destroy decades of work for a romantic whim. It's not a whim. James also stood up, his voice charged with all the frustration accumulated over weeks. I'm in love. Does that mean nothing to you? Love is a luxury that men in our position can't afford, his father retorted. We have responsibilities, obligations. And what about my responsibility to myself? What about my obligation to be honest with the woman I'm supposed to love and honor for the rest of my life? James turned to Victoria, who had remained surprisingly quiet during the exchange. Victoria, you can't want this either. A marriage where we both know I'm in love with someone else. Is that what you want for your life? Victoria looked at him with an expression James had never seen before. For the first time, her mask of perfect confidence cracked, revealing something that looked dangerously like vulnerability. Do you think I don't have feelings? She asked in a softer voice than usual. Do you think I've been pretending all these years? James felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on his own dilemma that he had never considered Victoria's feelings. Victoria, No, she interrupted, raising a hand. Let me speak. Yes, I'm in love with you, James. I've been in love with you since we were teenagers, but I'm not stupid. I've seen how you look at that girl and you've never looked at me that way. The silence that followed was different from all the others. There was a raw honesty in the air that had never existed between them. I don't deserve a marriage where I'm the second choice, Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. And you don't deserve to live a life you didn't choose. Edward Miller looked at his daughter in evident shock. Victoria, what are you saying? I'm saying I support James's decision, she declared, standing tall with a dignity James had never seen before. The contracts can be modified, business alliances can be restructured, but broken hearts are much harder to fix. The relief James felt was so intense that for a moment he thought he might faint. Victoria, thank you. You don't know what this means. Yes, I do, she smiled, and for the first time her smile was completely genuine. It means you now have to go to Argentina and find your watchmaker before she thinks you're a coward who gives up at the first complication. James felt a smile spread across his face, the first real smile he'd had in weeks. You know what? You're right. Robert and Isabella exchanged looks of defeat. They knew they had lost, but they also began to realize that maybe it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Their son looked more alive, more authentic than they had seen him in years. If you're going to do this, Robert finally said, do it right. Don't humiliate her by showing up empty-handed. James nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. 2 days later, James Smith boarded a flight to Buenos Aires. In his luggage, he carried legal documents confirming the orderly dissolution of the marriage contracts, an engagement ring that had belonged to his great-grandmother, and something he knew would mean more to Emily than any jewel, Mr. Roberts's watchmaking tools, which he had managed to recover from the pawn shop after days of searching. Finding Emily in a city of millions wasn't easy, but James had advantages that love provided: infinite determination and the inability to ever give up. He found her in a small watch shop in the San Telmo neighborhood, the Lost Time, working alongside an older man who was obviously her cousin. Through the shop window, James could see Emily bent over a workbench, completely absorbed in a delicate repair. She looked different. She had lost weight, and although she was still beautiful, there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her hands were still firm and sure. Her movement still had that special grace that had captivated him from the first day. James pushed the door open, a small antique bell announcing his arrival. Emily looked up automatically, and when she saw him, the small screwdriver in her hand fell, bouncing on the workbench. "Hello, Emily," James said softly. She stood up so quickly the chair rolled back, hitting the wall. "James, what are you doing here?" "I came to ask you to marry me," he replied bluntly. Emily's cousin, a middle-aged man with half-moon glasses and a paternal expression, looked between them and decided it was time to run some urgent errands elsewhere in the city. "I'm going to, buy supplies," he muttered, grabbing his jacket and disappearing through the back door. Emily and James were left alone in the silence filled with ticking clocks, each one measuring the beats of their racing hearts. "You can't be here," Emily finally said. "Your wedding to Victoria—" "There will be no wedding to Victoria," James interrupted. "I broke the engagement, legally, definitively, irrevocably." Emily's green eyes filled with tears. "What about the contracts? The jobs that would be lost?" "It was all exaggerated. The companies will be fine. There will be some adjustments, but no one is going to lose their job because of me." James approached slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Emily, forgive me for letting you go. Forgive me for not fighting for us from the very beginning. Forgive me for being a coward." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the defenses she had carefully built over weeks begin to crumble. "James, I took the money." "I don't give a damn about the money," he said vehemently. "I can give you all the money in the world if that's what you want. What I can't give you is a life without me, because that would be condemning us both to unhappiness." James took a small blue velvet box from his pocket. "This ring belonged to my great-grandmother. She was the only woman in her family who married for love, not convenience. My great-grandfather was a poor musician, but she defied her entire family to be with him. They had 50 years of a happy marriage." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring with an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "I want you to wear it. I want us to be the second generation of Smiths to marry for love." Emily was crying openly now, but she still hadn't taken a step toward him. "What if it doesn't work? What if our worlds are too different?" James smiled, that smile that had made Emily fall in love from the first day she saw it genuinely. "Then we'll make a new world, a world where the only thing that matters is that we love each other." Finally, Emily moved. She didn't walk toward him, she ran. She threw herself into his arms with such force it nearly knocked them both over, and James lifted her off the ground, spinning with her as the clocks in the small shop marked the rhythm of their happiness. "Yes," Emily murmured against his neck. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything." James gently set her down and slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her for generations. "I love you," he said, framing her face with his hands. "I love you more than words can say." "I love you too," she replied, before their lips met in a kiss that tasted of fulfilled promises and shared futures. When they parted, James had one more surprise. "I brought something for you," he said, pulling out a suitcase he had left by the door. When Emily opened it and saw Mr. Roberts' tools carefully arranged inside, the tears she had held back for weeks finally flowed freely. "How did you get them?" "They should never have been separated from you," James replied simply. "Now they're where they belong." Emily took one of her grandfather's most precious tools, a special file he had made by hand, and held it against her chest. "My grandfather would have been proud," she whispered. "He is," James assured her. "Wherever he is, he is." 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the gardens of the Smith estate, Emily Johnson became Emily Smith. Victoria was one of the guests of honor, radiant in a royal blue dress, and on the arm of an Argentine architect she had met during a healing trip to Buenos Aires. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson occupied places of honor in the front row, crying with happiness like the grandparents Emily never had. James's parents, though initially reluctant, had come to accept that their son had found something money couldn't buy. During the ceremony, as they exchanged vows they had written themselves, James promised to love every tick-tock of Emily's heart, while she promised to be the guardian of all his moments, the good and the difficult. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the antique clocks decorating the garden for the occasion chimed like church bells, marking the beginning of their time together. At the toast, James raised his champagne glass and said, "My wife taught me that the most valuable time is not what a clock marks, but what we share with the people we love. From now on, every second of my life belongs to her." Emily responded with a clear voice that reached every heart present. "My grandfather always said that the best watches don't just mark time, they beautify it. James doesn't just mark my time, he fills it with purpose, with joy, with infinite love." Years later, when their children would ask how they fell in love, James and Emily would tell them the story of the fake watch that had revealed an authentic truth, that true love needs no expert verification because it is recognized by the simple fact that it makes time stand still and simultaneously makes every second lived worthwhile. And in the workshop they built together on the estate, where Emily taught the art of watchmaking to a new generation, and James had learned that the best investments are not measured in money, but in shared moments. A special clock eternally marked the hours of their happiness, the first watch they had repaired together, a symbol of how two broken hearts had found a way to work perfectly in unison. Because in the end, as Emily always said while working with her magical hands and her eyes that saw beauty in the small things, true love is like the perfect mechanism of an antique watch, complex, delicate, requiring care and attention, but when it works correctly, it is capable of marking the most beautiful time of our lives. Have you also found that love that makes time worthwhile? Do you believe in stories where true love overcomes all adversities? We have reached the end of this beautiful love story. If James and Emily have moved you as much as they have us, don't forget to leave your like and share in the comments what city you've been following from. Your support means everything to us. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak directly to the heart. And tell us, what kind of story would you like to hear next time? Contemporary romance? Stories of overcoming? Family dramas? Your opinion helps us create the content that excites you the most. Thank you for accompanying James and Emily on their journey to true love. Remember that every love story begins with the decision to open your heart to the possibility of being happy.